Everyone, I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 18 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on International Trade. Pursuant to Standing Order 108 and the motion adopted by the committee on October the 23rd, 2020, the committee is studying Canada's effort to reform the World Trade Organization. Today's meeting is webcast and is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. I would like to now welcome our witnesses for the first panel today.
Madam Chair, I had my hand raised. Is it appropriate to raise a point of, it's a notice of motion that I had circulated late Thursday, just to read into record with no debate.
Go ahead, Mr. Sheehan.
Well, thank you very much, and to you and to the rest of the women on this committee. Well, if they're politicians or staff, happy International Women's Day as well. Very quickly, Madam Chair and committee, I circulated in both official languages the following motion that I just want to notice of motion, which I just want to read in as a public, as part of the record to be discussed at a future time by the committee. That pursuant to Standing Order 108(2), the committee undertake a study on Canadian exportation of green, clean, and low carbon technologies, that the study include an examination on how Canadian clean technologies such as hydroelectricity, wind energy, solar energy, carbon sequestration, grid management, and plastic recycling can impact an ever-evolving international markets. That the study analyze the role that government agencies such as the Trade Commissioner Services can help Canadian clean technology businesses scale up and export to new markets, and that the committee report back to the House. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Sheehan. Ms. Gray, did you have a point that you wanted to make? Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do have a notice of motion to read in as well, since we're allowing that at this point. And this is also, I had submitted this on Thursday, that pursuant to Standing Order 108(2), the committee undertake a study of no less than 4 meetings to evaluate the effectiveness of the Integrity Declaration on doing business with Xinjiang entities and other government measures on supply chains involving forced labor related to the human rights situation in Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, and that the Minister of Small Business, Export Promotion and International Trade be invited to appear, that the Minister of Foreign Affairs be invited to appear, and that Chief Trade Commissioner be invited to appear, that Canada's Ambassador to China be invited to appear, and the committee report its findings and recommendations back to the House. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Gray and Mr. Sheehan. So we will now go on to our witnesses. Thank you for your patience. From the BC Lumber Trade Council, we have Susan Yurovich, President and Chief Executive Officer of the BC Council of Forest Industries. Grain Growers of Canada, Andre Harp, the Chair. And then with Aaron Gulrich, the Executive Director. And from the Trade Justice Network, we have Jesse Watman, Coordinator. And from the Réseau Québécois sur l'intégration continentale, Claude Vaillancourt, President. Ms. Yurovich, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Susan Yurkovich, and I'm the President and CEO of the Council of Forest Industry. I have the great pleasure of representing the majority of forest products manufacturers in the province of British Columbia, which is made up of big and small companies that together produce about 50% of the country's lumber and pulp exports. I also serve as the President of the BC Lumber Trade Council, representing most BC lumber producers on trade matters, including the softwood lumber agreement or disagreement with between Canada and the United States. Given the importance of BC's forest sector to the Canadian economy, our workers and our communities, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the key role our trade relations and our international trade organizations play in the long-term success of our industry, and to share a couple of perspectives with respect to the World Trade Organization and potential reforms. First, a little bit about the importance of the forest sector here in British Columbia and in Canada. BC's forest industry has an economic impact like no other on our provincial economy. It contributes nearly $13 billion in GDP and generates about $4 billion annually in taxes and fees. And that's money that supports healthcare, education, and the other important social services that British Columbians and Canadians count on. Importantly, it supports about 100,000 direct and indirect jobs in rural communities and urban centers alike. And today, our sector makes up about 1/3 of BC's provincial exports. Our products are shipped to about 100 companies or countries around the globe, accounting for 21% of all the traffic at the Port of Vancouver, 46% of the container traffic through Port of Prince Rupert, and about 11% of rail traffic in Western Canada in recent years. As part of the small open economy that is both BC and Canada, strong trade relations and diversified markets have been critically important to the success of our industry. While the US continues to be the top BC destination for our forest products, accounting for about 55% of total exports over the last couple of decades, in partnership with Canada and the BC government over that same period, we've also led a charge in developing new markets for our high quality wood products. Specifically, we've made great inroads into Asia, where about 30% of our products are now sold. And this is critical because it reduces our dependence on the US market, where we continue to face unwarranted and punishing tariffs on softwood lumber. I'll come back to softwood lumber in a minute. As we look to the future, BC is poised to continue to help meeting the growing global demand for products that are the renewable, low carbon material of choice for everything from mass timber buildings to fiber-based packaging. And those are products that are helping to tackle climate change while also supporting jobs that we are proud of right here at home. As a trading nation, we are signatories to agreements that govern how we do this business around the world. And as with all relationships, these agreements will from time to time be tested. What's important to BC's forest industry, like many other export-dependent industries across the country, is that we have strong, effective, and efficient trade agreements in place, and that we have organizations that can help ensure that they are enforced and respected, organizations like the WTO. With that context in mind, I'd like to come back to our decades-long experience with softwood lumber dispute and highlight some observations from our experience that inform our general recommendations with respect to the study you're undertaking. This includes the importance of upholding the WTO dispute settlement mechanism, the need to have a well-functioning appellate body, and the requirement for mechanisms that ensure timely resolution of disputes. So to begin, we can't underscore how critically important it is to continue to have a strong WTO dispute settlement mechanism. As a trading nation, Canada has bilateral and multilateral trade agreements with countries around the world outlining the rules of the game, the terms by which each jurisdiction must abide. But even with the best agreements in place, from time to time, we do find ourselves in disputes with our trading partners. And when these disputes arise, we must have a well-functioning neutral body to adjudicate. A little perspective from our world. The dispute with the US about whether Canada provides unlawful subsidies to the lumber industry has been going on for about 40 years. As we sit here today, we are currently in the midst of the dispute, affectionately known as Lumber 5. The prior Lumber 3 and Lumber 4 disputes both ended in Canada's favor, with neutral international tribunals forcing the US Department of Commerce to rescind unsupported subsidy findings. A neutral entity, looking at the facts of the case, sided with what is true. And that's the reason we believe that the continuing availability of binding WTO dispute settlement is critically important to our industry and many others across our trading nation. Which brings me to our second recommendation, the need to ensure a well-functioning appellate body is in place. This past summer, a WTO panel released a 225-page report evaluating the US Department of Commerce's 2017 subsidy determination concerning softwood lumber. And in that report, the WTO identified 40 instances where, in its own words, no unbiased and objective investigating authority could have reached the findings that the Department of Commerce made based on the evidence before it. Well, that was good news for Canada, but the good news was very short-lived. In September, the US appealed the panel report, and they did that to an appellant body that doesn't currently exist. And the reason it doesn't exist is that the US has been blocking the appointment of new appellate body members for the past several years. By appealing to a non-functioning appellant body, the U.S. has indefinitely stalled the adoption of the final report, meaning that the very favorable result for Canada has in effect been neutralized for the foreseeable future. Given the importance of binding WTO dispute settlement for our industry, we strongly encourage government to do what it can to resolve the current impasse. The prompt appointment of neutral adjudicators is of key importance to ensure fair and efficient resolution of international disputes at the WTO. In the case of softwood lumber, this is all the more important in circumstances where the U.S. has likewise prevented the efficient progress of claims under NAFTA or the new CUSMA agreement by delaying the panelist selection now in the case of CBD for more than 3.5 years. Finally, while it's essential to ensure that the continuing availability of the WTO dispute settlement, there's always room to improve the old system. Specifically, reform that ensures timely resolutions of disputes would be viewed as both welcome and necessary. For example, while the resolution of disputes before panels and the appellant body is supposed to take a matter of months, it frequently is the case that it drags on for several years, and this delay creates both added cost and uncertainty for our industry, and I expect to all litigants. The longer a dispute takes to be resolved, the greater the adverse impact, and this is for sure the case with softwood lumber, where the industry has significant duties on deposit, duties that are now totaling nearly $5 billion as a result of unsupported findings of the U.S. Department of Commerce. These large financial burdens can only accumulate as the appeals drag on, tying up this cash indefinitely instead of being invested in plant and equipment, in training new workers and developing new products and new markets. In the case of softwood lumber, it also hurts U.S. consumers as duties increase the price of products, negatively impacting affordability, which is particularly egregious given that the U.S. lumber producers are not able to meet their country's own domestic demand. But more importantly, it hurts the thousands of Canadians, workers and families, along with companies and communities who depend on getting goods to markets and continued industry investment for their livelihoods. In closing, I want to thank you for undertaking the important work on this topic and to reiterate the importance of having a robust, functioning WTO dispute settlement system for the softwood lumber industry in Canada and for other export industries across our nation. In considering WTO reform, I urge the committee to carefully consider options that will ensure Canadian companies can get a fair hearing from a neutral body that's fully functioning and able to hear cases through to appeal and to deliver timely resolution to disputes when they arise. This is critically important for the economic health of our country that will continue to be a trading nation for decades to come, and for workers and communities who are sustained by getting our goods to market. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Konovich. On to the Grain Growers of Canada, please.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being here, Madam Chair, honorable members. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to appear here today. My name is Andre Harp, and I am the chair of the Grain Growers of Canada. GGC is the national voice for Canada's 65,000 grain farmers. Depending on the crops we produce, whether it be cereals, pulses, or oil seeds, we export between 70 to 90% of what we grow to a diversity of markets worldwide. I am also a third-generation farmer from the Peace River region of northern Alberta, and I grow malt barley, canola, and peas. The Grain Growers is also a member of the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, commonly known as CAFTA, which represents essentially all export-oriented agricultural commodities and food manufacturing, and is a strong champion of free trade and of the role of the World Trade Organization in trade liberalization. Ladies and gentlemen, all across Canada, grain farmers like me rely on free and fair trade. This is core to the success and competitiveness of our farm businesses, of our families, and of our communities, as well as the larger grain sector. I'd like to focus my comments on 3 areas. 1, the importance of trade to grain farmers and Canada's leadership at the WTO. 2, a full functioning dispute settlement mechanism, and lastly, revitalization of the WTO negotiation function. Grain farmers need a strong rules-based trade environment to ensure that we have a predictable access to international markets. In Canada, we are a mid-sized economy and we are largely built on exports, which means we rely on a predictable trade landscape, expanded and diversified market access, and a WTO framework that can provide certainty of our export markets. Your study looking at how to modernize the WTO is an important one. Since its inception, there has never been a greater need for an effective and enforceable rules-based system than right now. Grain farmers are actually concerned with growing nationalism, focus on self-sufficiency in food production, and new forms of protectionism spurred on by COVID-19. Agriculture is often the most vulnerable and the first target for protectionist measures. However, this approach is neither sustainable nor beneficial in the long term. Canada must hold a firm line against this growing wave of protectionism. Open borders allowed for the movements of inputs, ingredients, workers, and the expertise to cross borders throughout COVID-19, and for supply chains to continue to operate. Without open trade for agri-food, things would have been very different for families in Canada and around the world. We would argue that it is more critical now than ever to remove existing barriers, accelerate agri-food trade liberalization, and urgently fix and modernize the World Trade Organization. In that sense, we are very supportive of the federal government's ongoing leadership through the Ottawa Group on Reform to safeguard the WTO and the rules-based trading system. We appreciate the focus on ensuring that any support measures stemming from COVID-19 are targeted and transparent and avoid unnecessary barriers to trade, and to recognize that any emergency measures put in place should be withdrawn as quickly as possible to avoid any adverse effects on trade. However, challenges to the functionality of our trading system predate the pandemic. The grain sector has faced a laundry list of non-tariff trade barriers in recent years that have restricted market access and farmers' access to technology. We hope that the WTO modernization efforts will strengthen the function of the relevant committees for our sector, namely the Agriculture, the SBS, TBT, and the Rule of Origins committees, which would work to review and improve compliance to the WTO agreements on the application of sanitary and phytosanitary measures and technical barriers to trade, as well as adherence to international standards. These agreements require that measures introduced by WTO members states be based on science, applied to the extent necessary, and do not constitute an obstacle to trade. Another major concern for Canadian grain farmers is the dispute settlement mechanism. A system of rules without the ability to effectively and efficiently come to a resolution when disagreements emerge simply does not work. As such, the current paralysis of the WTO appellate body needs to be resolved. Since 2019, the appellate body has been missing the required number of members, leaving it unable to reach quorum and therefore unable to hear appeals. A solution to this impasse is needed so that the WTO dispute settlement can address the growing number of complex trade issues. In addition to the dispute settlement mechanism, a revitalized WTO negotiation function is required to update and strengthen the existing rules of trade and to ensure they align with today's realities. GGC supports increased momentum leading up to the ministerial conference, now expected in December 2021, to accelerate reforms and to agree on a renewed work program for agricultural negotiations. MC12 must deliver an outcome on agriculture, including on domestic support, among other measures restricting trade of agriculture. Large agricultural producing countries employ trade distorting measures that impact international markets and prices. We believe that there must be an equal playing field for farmers internationally, and the WTO plays an important role in ensuring that this will happen. Much work remains in multiple areas, from market access to export competition, transparency, timelines of notifications, and modernizing trade rules to fit today's business needs. As I prepared to appear before this committee, I came across a 2017 report from the Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food entitled Non-Tariff Trade Barriers to the Sale of Agricultural Products in Relation to Free Trade Agreements. I must say, if this document was not dated 2017, I would have guessed it was probably written last month. It supports the importance of WTO modernization and adherence to science-based decision-making. As highlighted in the report, and there's been a substantial amount of economic analysis on the cost implications of non-tariff measures to date. The data does show the sum effect of non-tariff measures for agri-food exporters is equivalent to tariffs ranging from 25 to 30% in Asia and 30 to 40% for the European market. More largely, the federal government must take a proactive strategy to enhance commercially viable access to export markets and to mitigate the trade distorting impact of non-tariff barriers on our sector's growth and competitiveness. The absence of WTO modernization will lead to more trade barriers, as well as less predictable, less transparent, and enforceable trading environment. The challenges our sector is facing in terms of protectionist measures will only increase over the next decade. The sooner we can accept this reality, the sooner we, a middle power in global trade, can effectively position itself in this increasingly protectionist world. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harp. On to Ms. Watman, Coordinator for Trade Justice Network.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for having me. My name is Jessie Wadham, and I'm here representing the Trade Justice Network, which is a coalition of environmental, civil society, student, Indigenous, cultural, farming, labor, and social justice organizations that came together in 2010 to call for a new global trade regime founded on social justice, human rights, and environmental sustainability. To name some of our members, this includes the Canadian Labour of Congress, Unifor, the Canadian Union of Public Employees, United Steelworkers, the Climate Action Network, just to name a few. The World Trade Organization has failed to serve Canada or create a better, fairer world for all, and the Trade Justice Network welcomes the calls for fundamental reform. For 3 decades, the regime of hyper-globalized trade, investment, and supply chains via the World Trade Organization has empowered pharmaceutical, agribusiness, financial, and other corporate interests in high-income countries to dominate economies to the detriment of national and local economies, workers, farmers, Indigenous peoples, our health, and the environment. In the past 3 decades, despite increased global economic integration, the numbers of the world poor have increased absolutely and relatively. Without a labor protection floor, we've seen repressed wage growth and increased precarious work. The climate and economic crises have been ignored, or needed solutions have been constrained by trade rules. There has been a rise in inequality within and between nations, as governments have been stripped of essential tools to pursue the well-beings of their peoples. And this is why the WTO is facing an existential crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic has only further exposed the inequality and instability of the current WTO regime. It's time for change. I'm going to focus my comments on the inequity of power at the WTO, regulatory practices, and the dispute settlement mechanisms. The reality is that while the WTO is supposed to be governed by its 164 members, it's actually managed by its most powerful members. The EU and the US, along with most Western OECD countries, have remained dominant and set the global rules of importance to multinational capital that have never been mutually beneficial for developing countries. This is especially played out in the when rich countries sidelined the Doha Development Round priorities while pursuing an explosion of bilateral agreements and plurilateralism at the WTO, which was then foisted onto developing countries. The interests of developing countries and the poorest communities and low-wage workers everywhere have been marginalized in many of these new negotiations. In the realm of domestic regulation, corporate interests have lobbied successfully for deregulation through the current trade regime. Further, dispute settlement mechanisms and other explicit constraints in the WTO and free trade agreements prohibit high standards of public and environmental protection. While claiming that domestic regulation maintains the ability of member countries to regulate in the public interest and facilitate increased trade, in reality, there's an inherent tension between the domestic regulatory space and trade liberalization. While the language in the General Agreement on Trade and Services recognizes the sovereign right to regulate, it does not preclude a challenge against a state on the grounds that it administered a regulation that did not fulfill its standards and criteria set under international instruments such as the WTO law. In effect, such questioning of domestic regulations via the WTO dispute settlement mechanisms and based on international disciplines and standards challenges the boundaries of the state's regulatory space and the role of its regulatory authorities. Since the finding of the WTO, regulatory barriers to trade have been at the top of the priority list for multinational corporations. Developed countries, on behalf of their largest industries and exporters, began to complain more loudly about the food and product safety standards, public health measures, and environmental protections that they were creating market inefficiency. Under this pretense of market inefficiency, it has facilitated a deregulation affecting labor rights, consumer products, and environmental protections. Further, international business lobbies have increased their advocacy of so-called regulatory coherence and cooperation, including a right to intervene in the regulatory process as early and as often as possible, hoping to derail or weaken pro-consumer or pro-environmental policies and regulations before they're even implemented, avoiding the need to later challenge them. Right through the pandemic, this has been clear. Negotiations have continued on limiting domestic regulation of the service sector, even as the concentration of service firms is posing a major impediment to timely and cost-effective procurement and distribution of essential goods. Negotiations to limit regulation and vetting of foreign investors continues, despite a clear need for production of personal protective equipment and medicines to be diversified. A fundamental transformation should mean no country should seek or be required to incorporate the so-called good regulatory practice into binding international treaties, as they've been designed to benefit corporate interests and multinational capital while putting democratic decision-making into a stranglehold. My next point is on the dispute settle mechanism within the current form of the WTO and trade regime. One of the biggest shifts with the WTO was that it could more easily sanction countries could be more easily sanctioned that tried to restrict foreign trade, most notoriously by giving foreign investors the ability to sue states under the opaque arbitration process. Previous witnesses have spoken to how this current dispute mechanism has hurt Canadian industries. Just last week, pharmaceutical companies are asking that countries such as Colombia and Chile and others are to be punished for seeking to ramp up their production of COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics without express permission from pharmaceutical companies. Sanctions are being urged by the drug industries, citing alleged threats posed by any threat to challenge basic intellectual property rights. Canada, along with other high-income nations, have refused to sign on to the proposal at the WTO or have delayed approving it. Even in the middle of a global pandemic, the rules of the WTO are prioritizing the profit of multinational corporations over people, especially in the global south. When it comes to the climate, it is paramount that the WTO and trade rules protect climate policy. WTO trade rules that conflict with climate action should be eliminated to allow communities and governments to advance bold climate protections without the fear of being challenged in trade tribunals. We should not be beholden to agreements such as the procurement agreement that can prohibit, say, renewable power purchasing. A fundamental transformation would align trade policies with climate objectives that enforce commitments to implement international climate accords and to make climate protecting policy changes. So in conclusion, the WTO has functioned to establish rules for the world economy that mainly benefit large transnational corporations at the expense of national and local economies, workers, farmers, Indigenous peoples, our health, and the environment. Recently, the Trade Justice Network signed on to a global call for WTO reform that was signed by hundreds of civil society organizations across the world. This call cited the Geneva Principles for the Global Green New Deal, where economists, policymakers, experts, and civil society organizations aimed to lay down the foundations of a new multilateralism that builds the rules of the economy towards goals of coordinated stability, shared prosperity, environmental sustainability, while respecting national policy sovereignty. It's these goals that should shape the WTO reform, people and the planet before profit. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Ms. Weltman. On to Mr. Vaillancourt, please.
Oui, bonjour.
This morning, I would like to first of all thank the Standing Committee on International Trade for your invitation. The Réseau québécois sur l'intervention internationale, it's a group that brings social groups, unions, community, international development groups, all groups interested in free trade. These organizations that are members of the RQIC represent over 1 million people. I'd like to quickly remind you of something. The WTO has a controversial past. This organization for several years was the target of social upheaval around the world. WTO has been the object of major demonstrations in Seattle, related to the anti-global movement, Cancun, Hong Kong, amongst others. And some of the criticisms leveled at the WTO are lack of transparency, they negotiate in favor of major enterprises, restrictive negotiations for southern countries, lack of equality, privatization of services, and the general agreement on services, and the negative impact on agriculture and peasants. So reforming the WTO is a major and ambitious project. Since the failure of the Doha cycle, the WTO has slowed down. They haven't really proposed anything. But this hasn't led to any collapse in international trade. Several asked the question, is WTO really necessary if the multilateralism doesn't allow us to better take into account the needs of several countries in the South and social groups around the planet? So one thing is, trying to reform the WTO is going to be an uphill task. So the proposals of Canada within the Ottawa Group don't seem efficient. So some of the, we've tried to strengthen the negotiation functions and the deliberation functions of the WTO. This will not really allow us to bring fundamental changes that we expect from the WTO. The problems of the WTO don't only concern the functioning of these internal mechanisms. They are somewhat cosmetic changes. The project from the Ottawa Group, unfortunately, is a rush forward, and they are not taking into account the several criticisms addressed to the WTO. So what we suggest, changes, not superficial changes, but substantial changes on the role of the WTO. A reformed WTO must review entirely the protection for intellectual property. By delaying the arrival of generic drugs on the market, the WTO has reduced access to essential medication for mostly southern countries. COVID-19 has made it even more necessary to withdraw restrictions on intellectual property. And this has been required by Doctors Without Borders, India, South Africa, and several experts throughout the world. Canada must support this demand rather than opposing it, as they have done. This withdrawal should be done in all other emergency situations. A reformed WTO should also abandon the systemic attack on non-tariff barriers. Instead of trying to attack regulations, especially those related to the environment, and looking at them as protectionism, they have to be encouraged, rather. It's impossible to attack a problem as vital as climate change by promoting wide open access to markets and unlimited movement of goods. COVID-19 has also made us realize to what point it's important to develop an economy that is more based around the collectivity and trying to produce goods locally. So there are some vital areas such as finance that need to be looked at, and this would allow us to avoid crises such as we saw in 2007 and 2008, and it also has to concern web giants and electronic giants. A reform to WTO must exclude certain sectors in commercial or trade negotiations. Canada signed an agreement on protection and promotion of cultural diversity, recognizing that protection of culture is incompatible with international trade liberalization. Other sectors should also benefit from similar protection and should be withdrawn from WTO negotiations. Agriculture, health, and education, for example. A reformed WTO should fight the tax competition between states. Even if the OECD is already looking at this problem internationally, it's important that this issue be looked at by an organization that is focused on international trade. International competition distorts trade competition, and it tends to draw investments to countries that have the most lax tax system. And this only promotes social inequalities and penalizes countries that have the best social policy. The WTO should define a basic tax rate for all member countries. So reforming the WTO is a daunting task. It's clear that its initial mandate of making international trade as free as possible no longer holds today, and it leads to catastrophe. Since its creation 26 years ago, social inequalities have exploded, and global warming is one of the major threats on our planet. COVID-19 has shown to what level neglecting the environment and weakening public services, direct consequences of trade liberalization supported by WTO, has led to the spread of the pandemic. So if the Doha cycle had been carried through, I think we would have had a situation even worse than what we have right now. We hope then that the government of Canada should have the courage to propose concrete changes to the WTO and reviewing an initial mandate that no longer holds today. So just in conclusion, I would like to point out that the delay in the time given us to prepare this work, we found it very short. We didn't have too much time, and some of the conditions we worked on were quite difficult. So maybe in the future, if we could have some better time frames. So I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vaillancourt. On to the committee for questions. Mr. Lobb for 6 minutes, please.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Welcome to all the witnesses. My first question is for the with the grain growers. And the question I have is just in regards to kind of the latest, even though it's not brand new, it's in regards to durum wheat in Italy. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that?
Go ahead, Aaron. You might be more up to date with that situation.
Sure, I can. Erin Garlick, Executive Director with the Grain Growers of Canada. Thank you very much for the question. This is a really important issue, and it's one that the industry has been calling on the federal government, on the Canadian government, to take to the WTO for a couple of reasons. One of the more obvious reasons would be to resolve the issue with Italy in particular, so to see them rescind or pull back on the mandatory country of origin labeling requirements. But I think more importantly, to send a signal to Italy and to countries around the world that when Canada talks about promoting rules-based trade, that we walk the talk. And so if we enter into an agreement with a country in particular where they're not in compliance, that we will hold them to account. And that is an example that we would like the Canadian government to set. In so doing, you prevent what's happening currently, where you see examples of this in other parts of Europe right now with the farm to fork strategy, where this country of origin labeling requirement is now bleeding into other jurisdictions. And I think that is due in part to a lack of action on the part of Canada.
Thanks very much. And I just wondered if you could, I know one of the reforms that have been ongoing or proposed, et cetera, is in regards to the appellate body and appointing panelists. And I know the previous U.S. administration, that was a way for them to never get a resolution on anything. The Biden administration has kind of indicated that they might be open to that. What is your early take on their ability to appoint panelists for the appellate body? I'll throw it to the grain growers again there.
And I guess one of the things we see with it's a new administration, so we're still trying to get a feel of exactly how they act and where they're going in the future. So I guess we're looking forward to hopefully some positive outcomes especially with the WTO and the appellate groups. So I guess we're still waiting to see exactly what they're going to do.
Okay. And I mean, if you look at it, the country of origin labeling issue that was in around the beef sector, and Mr. Holback, I think he's on the call here today. He'll remember that view took years and years and years, and you can see if you delay action on enacting a dispute at the WTO, which I mean the Durham wheat is now years old, it's going to take years to have a result, even though they say it doesn't take years, it takes years. So, you know, almost half a decade's worth of time will have passed and we still haven't got an outcome or a resolution. So I can see definitely we need to move forward on that, and definitely I know our people with BC Lumber Council would feel the same way. I want to ask I think it's the Trade Justice Network. I want to ask them a question, and it's in regards to the idea of environmental goods and the idea of tariff. Is it a tariff-free environmental goods, and just their thoughts on that? Maybe they're gone. Okay, all right. Madam Clerk, do you know if they're still here, or did they do their presentation and go?
I believe they are supposed to still be here.
Okay. All right.
Was the question
Maybe
addressed
we
to
need
Ms. Watam?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
I think she has connections problem. She has, yeah. So we're trying to reach her to see what's going on.
Okay. Okay. Well, when she gets back, I'll ask her about digital maybe after that, or broadband, tariff-free broadband. Okay. So next on with the BC Lumber and Trade Council, and it's kind of the same deal. It's just an ongoing issue in perpetuity, dealing with other countries and tariffs and et cetera. What is the best outcome? If we're talking about WTO reform, how can we speed the process up quicker so that, you know, organizations like yourself and the businesses you represent can get before the WTO, can get a result, and get some financial compensation? What is it besides getting Joe Biden to appoint some appellate body panelists?
Well, that's part of it, and you know, we all have hope for a new administration in the U.S., but we have had this dispute ongoing on lumber with both Democratic and Republican administrations for many, many years. So we are hopeful about the future. I think for us is that we just need to have an appellant body. Well, we need to have a trade organization that can hear these matters in a timely fashion, and you can get through the process. To your point, like, it just takes a very, very long time. Look, the process should be rigorous, and it shouldn't be a cakewalk, but these processes that drag out for years and years, they have very significant impacts on workers, on families, on companies, on communities, because you're tying up a whole lot of resources. I mean, we rely on these independent, neutral bodies to actually, because this issue with respect to lumber is large, it's with the U.S., but what we rely on is these neutral bodies that have that take an evidence-based approach to come to decisions that then apply pressure onto the U.S. Department of Commerce. And so if those processes are taking forever, we never get resolution. For lumber, it's very much a Groundhog Day situation. As soon as we resolve something, we seem to be into it again. But timeliness of process, they should be rigorous, they should be evidence-based, you know, they should be multifaceted, but they should be timely so that we can actually move forward, and we can not tie up resources, both, you know, duties or legal or time and energy that could be better and invested in the Canadian economy and Canadian communities.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lob. On to Mr. Sarai, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question will be also to Ms. Yurkovich, who's been leading this fight for on behalf of lumber producers in British Columbia, and she's become a very good expert on this. As we all know, we have thousands and thousands of jobs in the softwood lumber industry. In my riding in particular, I think we have some of the most per capita softwood lumber jobs in the province, maybe even in the country. And so it's of deep concern to me when these tariffs are on year after year, and different mechanisms are used to stall them. What I want to know from you, Ms. Yurkovich, is how has it impacted the industry, even though prices have been high and producers have been able to withstand it. But we've also seen when that was not the case and what it's done to the industry, and it devastated it in the past. And you alluded to a very good point today that there's $5 billion in duties that are collected that could be invested back into the industry. And the sad thing is this $5 billion is at the backs of Americans who are building homes or buying homes. They're paying it, and it's used for political interests, and it's also not helping those that are in British Columbia that are producing this this great lumber that could be using this to, as you said, improve the industry, get the latest technology, and also improve trades and technology in the industry. So how can you give us a minute and tell us how it's impacting your industry?
I mean, it's weird. One of the things out of COVID has been a lot of people residing at home, and the home has been a very big focus. So out of this, there's nothing good. Well, there's very few things good that have come out of COVID, but there has been a reinvestment in home, and for our industry, that's actually buoyed our industry. That coming off 2018 and end of 2018 and end of 20 and through 2019 and early 2020. Where we had a huge number of curtailments and closures of mills, and those affect families and workers in communities right across our country. I mean, I talked about there's 100,000 jobs that are forest dependent in the province of British Columbia. Everybody always thinks about them as, jobs that are largely rural. I mean, you were talking about where you reside, Mr. Sarai, and it's a huge contributor to the local economy, even in the lower mainlands and in Calgary and in Montreal and in Toronto. We might not see the forest dependent jobs, but about 40% of the forestry jobs in British Columbia are actually located in Vancouver, the southwest part of the province. So they're in logistics, marketing, banking, financial transactions, all kinds of things, logistics, shipping, etc. And so those, each one of those jobs has a family and a story attached to it. And so when you have, we are buoyed by high prices right now, but that just masks the underlying problem. I mean, fundamentally for us, every dollar that's sitting, on deposit with the U.S. could be spent on plant, on equipment, on investing in communities, on developing new products. And when we think about the products that people are looking for, they are looking for products made from fiber because when they come from sustainably managed forests, and they're recyclable and renewable, and people are looking for products made from fiber because they're a better choice, particularly in a climate constrained world. If you build something out of wood, it's storing carbon for the life of the product. We had phone calls to us during the early part of the pandemic. How much more pulp can you make that can go into PPE? How can we source some of that product locally? Firms would love to be able to make those investments, but $5 billion, about 2.5 of that is coming from province of British Columbia. That's a lot of money that's sitting on the sidelines that could be invested in workers and communities and new products.
Ms. Yurkovich, besides prompt appointments and not blocking appointments to the appellate body, what other reforms specifically would help as the softwood lumber industry has become almost an expert with 5 rounds of this or 5 incarnations of this? What other reforms would help this dispute mechanism?
Well, I mean, like all processes, it's not perfect, and there's certainly room for improvement. But we would like to see, some of the other witnesses here talked about non-tariff barriers, which of course we are subject to as well. And even having a level playing field, including around how products are produced and environmental and regulatory considerations. I mean, we don't want to have a lax system. It's not good for the world to have very strong environmental requirements in one place and lacks in another place, because then money just flows there. We actually do a good job here in Canada. We have an abundance of low carbon products that we produce, largely in British Columbia because of our energy system, which is 96 or 97% clean. So we've got an opportunity, and we want to be able to make that available to the globe. We don't want to see there be opportunities for people to invest in places that don't have as stringent environmental considerations. So making sure it's fair, it's applied evenly across the piece, making sure that the process works as it, works in a timely fashion, making sure we have the, a roster of people that we can draw from that are experienced, that are going to look at the facts, and who are able to opine in a way that's not influenced by, externalities that are going to look at the evidence and give countries a fair hearing.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Sarai. On to Monsieur Savard Tremblay for 6 minutes.
Thank you. Welcome to all the participants. Thanks for being here. My question is for Mr. Vaillancourt from the Regroupement Québécois sur l'intégration continentale. I just want to ask you, it's a rhetorical question. On paper, the idea of dispute settlement mechanism doesn't sound bad, just to have some legal fairness amongst countries, prevent the richest and strongest countries always win these trade conflicts, to give a chance to the smaller countries. On paper, it seems to be a good idea. So what is the issue? No, I don't think it's the dispute settlement mechanism. I think it's necessary. I think it's important. The idea of strengthening is a good thing. But what I find difficult here is that some of the questions raised are much more basic on the role of the WTO in today's world. So if the WTO can correct some of these mistakes, yes, that has to be done. But they should not change direction. If they don't change direction fundamentally, which is needed now, that's where I have questions. The record of the WTO is not a very glorious one. We have to stress that. It's not good for workers around the world. It's not good for the environment. So all these factors, they come from the fundamental vocation of WTO. That's to liberalize trade as broadly as possible. I don't think that's where we are right now. Even the Davos organization, organizer Dash Ram, says we must end neoliberalism. That's not where we are right now. It requires more regulations, a better way to share wealth. And if the WTO, when we're talking about reforming the WTO, if they are looking for ways to improve internal mechanisms, if they are not asking questions on their initial mandate, to me, it's an issue. They are not listening to the criticisms being leveled at them. They are not looking at the problems that arise from the system that they have put in place. So basically, it's rather an issue of orientation. It's not so much the structures. It's not the idea of having this organ that settles disputes. You are not challenging that. No, not at all. We support that. But if we're talking about reforming the WTO, they must go much further. They're not going far enough. They're not listening what the different social groups have been claiming for years and years. Yes, reform WTO, but it has to be a much more fundamental reform. It has to go into the goals, the mission. We must recognize that this organization has a lot of problems, and we're saying we are far away from what it was meant to be. After the Second World War, we're talking about needs at the time that are much different from the WTO in 1995, for example. Now, what elements should you want to element? The most favored nation, as an example, maybe if we had 2 or 3 specific points you would like to remove. The first thing would be the environment. So allowing environmental protection to take precedence over free trade. It's a matter of life and death for the planet. So another thing that's really fundamental is the taxation. The tax competition, it distorts international trade and it prevents countries from putting in place wealth redistribution mechanisms. So the WTO, this is not really within on the radar screen, but why not? One might ask. And then when we're talking about emergency issues or, well, IP, the rules are very much in favor of the major organizations. We need to have quick access to drugs. So just these three items, these are important, but we have several more proposals. And as we said in our presentation, we would like to make international trade as free as possible. Those who are saying that that's anachronistic, that's not where we are right now when we are thinking in defending populations around the world. So you're saying trade as a means, but not as a goal. We must include the human development goals, yes. Wealth redistribution, fighting climate change, and greater equity between North and South nations. So the WTO has created this wide gulf between the northern countries and the southern countries. And we saw in Seattle, that was one of the key criticisms from the southern countries. And the negotiating process is very, very difficult for the nations of the South. That's a major issue. So the WTO is not linked to the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, one of the few organizations that are not connected. Should we link them to the environmental agreements? How do we concretely put in place those proposals you make that I agree with? Yes, the goals.
Ben voilà, j'ai dit.
Anyway, I said what I had to say. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. McGregor.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Before I begin, I thought I'd just check to see if the Trade Justice Network is still with us, if Ms. Wadham is still there.
I see her in the room, but her camera is not open. Miss Watam, do you hear me?
Okay, so she can hear the audio.
I can hear it. My connection keeps cutting in and out, so I've been having difficulty. So I'm keeping my camera off to hope that boosts my connection. And
okay.
It keeps cutting out. Yeah.
Not a problem. I'll direct my first question to you, given that you can still hear me. When you were mentioning in your opening statement about the Geneva Principles for a Global Green New Deal, the opening paragraph from that executive summary just talks about how we once had a version of multilateralism that permitted nations to regulate international markets and pursue those strategies for equitable prosperity and development. And it reflected really the experiences that we had from both World War II and the Great Depression. And I think the leaders in the post-war period in the 1950s and 60s, they were intimately acquainted with just how fragile our international system was, having gone through a depression and a world war. And I think, with the current pandemic, we are learning that again. We've seen the stresses on our supply lines and so on. But given that, climate change is very much going to be the defining issue of this 21st century, and putting this in the context of WTO reform, can you just give the committee a sense of, just really kind of what's at stake? Like just the threats that climate change, if left unabated, poses to our trade networks, especially with countries that have a lot to lose if their climates change, with increasing desertification, scarce water supplies, migration of peoples and so on, and why it's just so important for us to put that into the context of WTO reform.
Yes, absolutely. I'll definitely take that question. If I cut out, it's because my because my connection dropped. But I think, I mean, you mentioned the pandemic, and I think the ways in which the global community has come together, especially when we're talking about civil society organizations and grassroots organizations who are on the front lines of both the pandemic and the climate change, we can see how those crises are similars in a way because the stakes are both so high, and the ways in which the World Trade Organization and the current trade regime rules have constrained, even if governments want to take actions to prioritize the livelihoods and lives of communities, they're actually unable to do so because of the ways that the trade is structured right now. And we can see this in the ways that free trade agreements are able to be used as a way to, constrain governments from taking local public, from prioritizing buy local or other environmentally friendly projects. And so when I think
I think you've put yourself on mute.
Ms. Wadman, are you with us or have you lost the connection?
It seems like she's still there.
We're not getting any response for her, and this is taking up Mr. McGregor's time here. So maybe you should go on to one of the other witnesses, Mr.
Okay, I'll move on to Mr. Vaillancourt. I guess it's in a similar line of questioning. Maybe, we don't want to lose sight of the lessons that have been learned from this pandemic, the strains that have been put on global supply lines and so on. And maybe with the same line that I was asking about, the threat of climate change and so on, any lessons you would like to see us really firmly commit to when we are looking at WTO reform, based on our experiences over the last year, but also the challenges we will face over the next decade?
Well, I think one of the major issues for the WTO is that this effort to always systematically attack tariff barriers, they see that there as a protectionist measure. In my opinion, that's not the right way to go about things. Quite obviously, what we can expect in the future, we have to do a significant energy transformation. That's very important. We have to think about the economy differently. We have to reduce the circuits. We have to produce more locally. We require regulations to organize the society based on the energy transformation necessary. So that's why I think a group such as the WTO that really wants a broad-based trade liberalization, and historically an agreement such as the agreement on services in terms of liberalization, that's quite extreme. So we have to envisage the world differently. The WTO, if the reform must take place, this reform has to be substantial, it has to be structural, it has to be in how the economy is perceived. I was talking about examples earlier, even in high elitist economic groups, people are ready to make that change. So I think the WTO must question some of its methods and look at the economy based on the challenges facing us: energy transformation, social inequalities that are widening every day. And so these are issues that are very important, and if WTO has to do meaningful reform, they have to do that. They shouldn't come up with obstacles. They must allow countries to make the necessary changes to solve those issues.
Question.
Sorry, Mr. McGregor,
no worries.
your time is up there. On to Ms. Gray for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. My first questions are for Ms. Yurkovich of the BC Council of Forest Industries. And our last softwood lumber agreement was 2006 to about 2015. And so now with no agreement and with softwood not being negotiated into CUSMA, based on some of the testimony that you've had here today, it sounds like you're likely at the mercy of a functioning WTO to resolve disputes. How has your organization and those that you represent been affected since we've last had a softwood lumber agreement with the United States?
Yeah, the last agreement was 2016 to 2006 to 2015 with a 1-year standstill period, and we've of course been back into paying duties, which were put on us in 2017. You know, it adds costs. But mostly it creates volatility and uncertainty, and I think that that's not good. We've had a lot. We know what it's like after this year to live with uncertainty, and you know, I think for our sector, this ongoing battle on the trade front, it takes up a lot of time and energy and resources, and most frustratingly, it doesn't allow us to deploy those resources in a different way. And I think, you know, it has real impacts when we have, you know, we're in good markets now, but when we were in bad markets, we had a lot of people that were out of work very quickly. And so when you look at 2019, it was a devastating year, and each person that loses a job in a mill, these are good family supporting jobs, jobs that build communities. And so when you have that kind of volatility and loss, it can have a huge impact on workers and communities. So, you know, we would like to get resolution. We would like to get resolution of this, particularly given that we've always had a North American market for lumber. You know, they need our lumber. It's a great building material for people who are looking to make good choices for the planet. And we just would really like to have this resolved once and for all.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate those comments. I've certainly seen firsthand in my community of Kelowna Lake Country, because we had a mill here, Tolko, which had closed, and hundreds of jobs were lost recently. So we've certainly seen that firsthand here. We know that the Ottawa Group has been working to find solutions relating to the WTO. Have you seen any noticeable changes or reforms which have benefited the forestry industry since this group was formed?
I couldn't say specifically.
Okay, fair enough. That's good information. You mentioned the importance of a binding dispute resolution settlements, where decisions that should take months were taking years. And how has the forestry sector been affected by this? Have you seen decisions yourself that you felt could have been easily rectified, and in fact they extended over a long period of time?
Well, if you look at the current situation we're facing, the decision out of the WTO in the summer was a stunning victory for the country. It proved yet again that our industry was not subsidized, and so we have that decision. It's been made, yet it's been appealed, and it's basically in limbo. It's important to have those decisions finalized, because that's what actually, in the end, in both other Lumber 3 and Lumber 4. That's actually what, for us, puts, you know, pressure on the U.S. to actually come to the table and to do the right thing. And so it's very frustrating to us to see that put in limbo. And it's, you know, it's frustrating that you can appeal it to a body that the body that you're, or that the party that you're litigating against has the ability to thwart. So it just doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem right. It's not due process, and it's super frustrating.
Have you seen, thank you for that, have you seen non-tariff barriers affect your industry, and how do you see the WTO modernizing in order to be able to positively address these issues?
Yeah, I think that's you know, phytosanitary issues, issues around non-tariff barriers for our sector are real. I mean, we see them all the time. We've seen them leveled not just at our sector, but we've seen other instances even over the last year or so, and it's very it's challenging. We put a lot of time and effort into making sure, as I'm sure the grain growers and other producers in the country do, to making sure that our products meet very high standards through our quality assurance programs, through our auditing processes, and to see those non-tariff barriers kind of creep in is a super tricky way to basically harm your competitors in a way that looks like you're trying to do the right thing. And so we guard against that. We spend a lot of time and effort on that. And like I said, Canada has very good systems for making sure that we make sure that our products are of the highest standard.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Yurvik. Excuse me for interrupting, but we have to move on. On to Mr. Dhaliwal for.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, on this Women's Day, I want to congratulate you and all the women around the globe. A very happy Women's Day, and want to thank them for all the contribution that they have made to our society around the globe. My question, Madam Chair, is going to Susan Yurkovich, who have done a great work and shown a great leadership in British Columbia when it comes to lumber industry. I was called Susan. Susan, you've been here during the last parliament as well. And I have seen an enormous effect, over the past many years. I'm sure Randeep will agree. I mean, 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, when Sikh community came in, the way to end up was small towns, in the lumber industry. That's where the jobs were. And today, with declining number of jobs, those small towns are becoming ghost towns. It did affect over the years, but coming back to WTO, when we have 100,000 jobs, $13 billion in GDP and $4 billion in taxes and fees. The decision that you mentioned, there were two decisions that were made in favor of Canada, the number 3 and number 4. How does that decision address the economic impact that occurred over the past many years?
Out of those decisions, sorry, impact?
In a positive way.
Yeah. I mean, those when we did get resolution, of course, we have greater certainty about what the operating conditions are. So it allows companies to choose to make investments and to sort of know what the rules of the game are going to be. I would say those two decisions were out of the former NAFTA process, but we can't get there until we have these international bodies eventually finding in Canada's favor and putting pressure on to the US system, which is, where we ultimately have to get resolution.
So when you say that we have to have a well-functioning WTO body and we have to have a effective appellant body as well. Now the decision has been appealed by US. Under these circumstances, how long you think this appeal process will take, and exactly, what do you mean by the appellant body? Like, if we have to bring that time frame down.
So the situation with the WTO is we have the decision from the summer, which finds it's a very, very strong victory for Canada. And now it has what every party always has the right to appeal a decision. So the US has the right to appeal. And so they've chosen to appeal. Unfortunately, they've appealed to a body that's not properly constituted because the appellant body doesn't have enough members to hear the appeal because the US won't appoint their members. And so that's what basically that decision is in limbo for, and I can't really tell you how long that will take because I can't tell you when the US might choose to appoint their folks to the appellant body.
So even if we have a body, I mean, US appoints those, and how long is that the appeal process, you think, if we had all those members in present?
Yeah, if we had the appeals process, it would still take, it would take us a couple of years likely to work through it. And you have to remember that with the lumber file, we have appeals and then we have administrative reviews on the CUMSA or the new NAFTA side of things. In addition to the WTO, we use both mechanisms so it's basically ongoing until you can reach resolution, which is what has happened in the past. In the case of 2006, we got to a point where there was enough pressure and we negotiated a deal.
So now you also said there is 30% you have found new markets, when it comes to lumber industry. What else can be done from a government perspective that we have much bigger share in other countries that we are not dependent on the US?
Yeah.
A brief answer if possible, Ms. Yurovich.
Yeah, I mean, we're continuing to diversify markets. We're continuing to work through the Canada Wood Group program that the federal government is a partner in and has been for many years. And we'll look to continue to diversify both products and markets, but that takes time. And so the US needs our lumber and we would still like to be able to sell it to them.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Savard Tremblay for 2.5 minutes, please.
Well, I'll come back where we stopped the discussion in the previous round. So I'll come back to Mr. Vayankou. You spoke about intellectual property. Could you expand more on that chapter? Yes, currently the rules under the WTO really favor protecting drugs. The protection is meant to go as far as possible, so it causes an issue with access to generic drugs for the nations of the South. One could even say the situation is catastrophic. Basic medication that becomes almost impossible to obtain, hence widespread disease, and that's what we're seeing currently with the COVID pandemic. 2 countries members of the WTO, India and South Africa, have specifically asked that that protection be suspended so that they can come up with their own vaccines and make them available to a lot of people, not just depending on the private sector that draws huge benefits from this. We're talking about illnesses, about survival of populations. So I think it's very important that Canada should intervene and support these 2 nations so things can move as quickly as possible and that access to the vaccine be as widespread as possible. So you can see to what extent regulations as far as intellectual property within the WTO, but even in relation to other agreements signed by Canada would be important. So at least during the pandemic, it's not such a good idea in the context of a pandemic to ensure the extension of drugs. Absolutely not. And the WTO can really, and they can intervene quite quickly on that. They have to ask that all of that be reduced during these exceptional circumstances.
On to Mr. McGregor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I would be remiss if I didn't ask a question of the grain growers of Canada, who are frequent witnesses at my standing committee on agriculture and agri-food. The new Director General of the WTO has, she was elected on a promise to really update the WTO rule book to take into account 21st century issues like, the green and circular economy. So she has put the world on notice that the environment and climate change are quite important to her. I wanted to ask you, because you, along with other groups, have joined together to form the Agriculture Carbon Alliance in Canada. And I was wondering if you could just inform, in the context of WTO reform, what your participation in an organization like that will do for Canada's efforts in leading this conversation with WTO reform.
Well, thank you very much. And I guess, the interesting thing, and I've been listening earlier or during the morning now, is basically, the connections between trade and the environment. And I guess and as a producer myself, but basically as the agricultural industry in Canada, we are very well.
Règlement, Madame la Présidente, il n'y a pas d'interprétation de par la qualité.
The point of order, there is no interpretation, there is poor sound.
Problem. Just hold on, Mr.
You have
Hart,
to raise.
please,
You have to
until
raise
we
your
make
mic.
sure we have translation.
Okay, Mr. Harp, you just have to raise your mic.
Yep, is this better?
If you could continue speaking, please.
Okay, thank you. You know, I guess as a producer, we are so connected to the environment, and I do believe trade will have to be connected to the environment as our connection to the newly formed Carbon Alliance. And I guess the reasons we have formed that alliance is basically to show everybody else, including the world, how effective we are in capturing carbon and how effective Canadian agriculture is in dealing with carbon already. And we look so very forward to being able to do better. We believe we are doing quite well right now. But like I say, there's always room for improvement. And I look forward, like I say, to the new Director General, to see, what she'll come up with for World Trade Organization guidelines.
Thank you very much. Sorry for the technology issues and translation sometimes. On to Mr. Hoback as our last questioner for 5 minutes, please.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Ms. Gray?
Mr. Holback is just rebooting. He'll be on shortly. So if we can just move to our next speaker, which is Mr. Albutaf instead. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Speaker or Chair. The question to Ms. Jurkovic. On softwood lumber, how much of a progress have we made in the last 5 years in order to be able to change the position of U.S. when it comes to our industry?
I would like to say a lot, but we're still here. We're still in this. And the tricky thing about the U.S. is the government of Canada could actually create an agreement with the U.S. and bind the Canadian industry to that agreement. That's not the case in the United States. The U.S. industry can use its trade laws, and they do regularly, against our industry, and the U.S. government can't actually enter into an arrangement without the industry at the table. And so it's very difficult. It's become kind of a business strategy for them to use their trade laws against Canada. It's unfortunate. We've got a lot of work to do to grow demand for wood and low carbon wood products. So it's super frustrating to us that we haven't been able to resolve this. We think there's way more opportunities to be had working collectively and collaboratively to increase fiber in all kinds of products from sustainably managed forests, but instead we continue to spend a lot of time and energy on litigation.
So if I understand correctly, this is a private sector solution. Is that correct?
Well, no, it's ultimately this disagreement has been resolved in the past. If history is a teacher of how this will be resolved in the future, it has been when at some point when the leadership of both countries have dug in and brought their weight to bear both on the U.S. industry in particular. And so my expectation is that we will get there at some point. We got a lot of issues on the plates of both governments. We're coming out of hopefully we're coming out of a global pandemic. We've got lots of work to do to lift people up. We hope that when we get through this softwood lumber issue, we'll get back on the table and we can get a durable solution.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, can we go back to Mr. Hoback to give him a chance to ask his question? Thank you.
Mr. Hoback, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and hopefully you can hear me okay. It's amazing how your computer decides to update itself as you start questions. To the Forestry Association, this has been an ongoing dispute, and one thing I will say about the appellate body is there is modifications that need to be done. And one of the frustrations I find is when we do get a judgment in our favor, for example, like we received this summer, there's no way to enforce that judgment. And of course, now that in this case, they've gone and appealed it. But in the past, we still had the same problem. Any advice that you'd give for the Canadian government to seek as they go through the modifications in the appellate body that we should be looking at?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because really these decisions have actually been what's brought weight to bear on the Department of Commerce, because these WTO decisions, they are actually prospective, and so they actually don't give us a lot of recourse, even when you get a positive decision. I think that one of the things that you have to look at is, when you get these decisions, is what is the enforcement mechanisms for making sure that the decisions are respected, and that any outcomes that are in
Appel au
those.
règlement, Madame la Présidente, il n'y a toujours pas.
Point of order, Madam Chair. We still don't have interpretation.
Put your mic a little bit further to your mouth, because like it's popping too much. A little bit further and up, I think. That's what I was told.
Is that better?
Could you speak a little bit, please?
I'm just wondering if that's better sound. I don't know why.
Much better. Thank you very much. Much
okay,
better.
Thanks. Okay. I just think so. I'm sorry about that, but I think what we should also look at is, what are the enforcement mechanisms? How do we put these decisions into force? And so I think that's something that, as the changes are being looked at, we need to look at that as well.
We found that with cool, when we country of origin labeling on beef products. We won the case, and then we had to figure out a system or strategy to actually enforce the winning. One of the things, I'm going to maybe pivot to the Grain Growers of Canada here, because I have a little bit of time. In the Italian durum case, why, can you explain to me, there hasn't been a challenge? Why haven't we taken this to WTO? And do you think that has brought on other tariff actions in other countries because we haven't stood up in the Italian case?
Go ahead, Erin.
Thank you. I don't know why we haven't brought it to the WTO. I know that the industry has been calling on the Canadian government to do just that. To your point specifically, I think, Mr. Hoback, because we want to see resolution of this issue, that has a direct and immediate impact on Canadian grain farmers. But I think more broadly, and what we're seeing now, is you see this sort of contagion, if you will. We're looking at, like I mentioned earlier, with the European Union's farm to fork strategy, there are provisions within that strategy to allow that similar requirement to exist outside of Italy and across the European Union. And so when those issues go unaddressed, for example, that's our fear. Our fear is that a signal is sent that this is okay, that there are no ramifications or consequences when you don't abide by the rules embedded in the agreement. And in this case, it's the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement between Canada and the European Union. So we continue to ask for the Canadian government's assistance. We'd like to see this brought before the WTO to resolve the issue, but B, also to ensure that we send a strong signal that Canada believes in rules-based, science-based trade, and we're prepared to stand up for it.
How much time do I have left, Chair?
You don't have any left according to my schedule.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. To all of the members that, for whatever reason, were not able to get their questions in, for Ms. Watman or the other witnesses that seem to have a bit of technically challenged problems, if you send them off to the clerk, she would forward them on to the appropriate witness, if that is helpful to the committee members. So I want to thank our witnesses for the very valuable information and the work that you continue to do to advance the trade issues around Canada. So our witnesses can disconnect, and I will suspend for a half a minute so that we can then go on to our committee business portion of the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
invitation. So I'll just outline what we've got before us. So for upcoming business, we have the estimates, which have been referred to the committee by the House on February the 25th. The ones that we have received are the Invest in Canada Hub. So I've asked that the invitation be extended to Minister Ng and her officials to appear already, so that the committee will be in a position to report on the estimates prior to May 31st. Next, on WTO reform, we've had 2 meetings up till today. We are scheduled to have another 60 minutes on Friday. Last October, though, we did talk about having 3 meetings on this, on the WTO issue. And so I would appreciate some direction from the committee members if they feel so far, if we want to have a 3rd meeting, we will need to make that decision so that we can organize up the calendar. We've got 2 draft reports that we're going to have to go over. First one is on trade between Canada and the United Kingdom. The potential transitional trade agreement study has been distributed last Friday, and it's ready to be reviewed by the members. And I will be tabling, following the vote this afternoon, the CIIT report as well. The second draft report that's being worked on is the one on Canada's international trade after COVID-19. Changes, federal supports, and exporters and trade agreement priorities is scheduled to be distributed to members by March the 26th. Next, we expect to have private member Louis Plamondon's Bill 216 may come to a vote in the House this week, and if carried, is going to be referred to our committee. And one other thing, as a reminder, last October 23rd, when we had a committee business section, we did adopt a motion to hold a minimum of 2 meetings on the investor-state dispute settlement mechanism selected impacts. In addition to that, we have several motions that have also been referenced today from Mr. Sheehan and from Ms. Gray, and other motions that are already tabled. So the question for us is how we would like to proceed today. Okay, Mr. McGregor.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So I've been in contact with Mr. Blakey, and I believe he had given notice of motion for something that now has been slightly amended. So I'll read it out very slowly, but he has been in discussion with some members of this committee already. So I'll read it out slowly just for my colleagues' benefit. It reads as follows: that pursuant to Standing Order 108 Sub 2, the committee undertake a study of Canada's trade policy and trade agreements in respect of how they may help or hinder the production and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines in Canada and across the world, including, but not limited to, 1, Canada's position with respect to a proposal at the World Trade Organization to provide a quote, a waiver from certain provisions of the TRIPS agreement for the prevention, containment, and treatment of COVID-19, unquote. 2, how Canada's trade agreements, like CITA, may be used to ensure Canada's vaccine advance purchase contracts are respected. And 3, where Canada's current trade position should motivate accelerated capacity in domestic vaccine manufacturing capability, the committee dedicate a minimum of 4 meetings to the study, and that the committee report its findings to the House.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. McGregor. I'm sorry, point of order, Ms. Bindayan.
Sorry, just as a point of clarification from my colleague, I don't seem to have that motion myself. Was that text circulated in both languages, or is this something that will be circulated shortly?
So my understanding is that Mr. Blakey had put this, the original motion on notice a while ago, I think maybe last year. It was dealing at its center with the TRIPS waiver. This one has been slightly reworded.
Thank you.
Yes, it was tabled quite some time ago, but now that it has been, this proposed changes, I'm not sure if that requires a time limit or, yeah, it doesn't appear to be the exact same as the one that Mr. Blakey had tabled previously. So we'll have to get some clarification to, certainly we know what the intent was. Ms. Gray?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to say that we would be supportive of those amendments as have been read out, and certainly we can make amendments to motions as we are here without having to go through another process. Thank you.
Okay. So, Madam Clerk?
Do people want a recorded vote on the motion from Mr. Blakey or from Mr. McGregor?
What is does the committee?
Madam Chair, I'm sorry if you don't see, but I do have my hand raised.
Now I see. Now I do. Yes, thank you. Go on, Ms. Bendayan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and you know, perhaps I could seek the views of other colleagues, but I would like to review the text of the motion that we would be voting on before doing so. If unless there is some urgency to vote right this moment, I would appreciate receiving the text in both English and French for the benefit of all colleagues.
Okay, thank you. Certainly makes sense. Mr. Aya?
Same thing, Madam Chair. I would like to review the text in advance.
So a suggestion might be that I'm not sure we're going to get that text that quickly. We could hold that decision on that could be held off until Friday's meeting if that was the desire of the committee. Is that all right? Everybody's okay if we hold down Mr. Blakey's suggested motion that everybody will have a chance to get it and review it and we could deal with it on Friday? Any objections to that?
I just did forward it to the clerk. I just wanted to let you know it's just been sent right now.
Okay, thank you. So this coming Friday's meeting is again 60 minutes on WTO and 60 minutes on the final draft report on Canada UK. So that's going to take us to that meeting. And we then have to look at the meeting of the 18th. If we want to go on to, we may have 216 at the same time. So if there's any particular direction, ideas, suggestions from the committee as to the direction they would like to go in, Ms. Bendayan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to hear from my colleagues, the co-chairs of the committee, Ms. Gray, and of course the representative of the NDP for Mr. Blakey and Simon Pierre. For my part, I do think that what we heard today from witnesses was helpful, and that perhaps we should continue hearing from witnesses on Friday on the WTO. Of course, I understand from you, Madam Chair, that we might have a PMB 216 coming to this committee, which I would welcome views from the clerk if that would take precedence over the other studies that we have before us. But I do note that there was interest from all parties to study investor-state dispute mechanisms, and that was something that we had voted on quite some time ago. And so I look forward to getting to that study, as I'm sure other members do as well.
Thank you. Ms. Gray?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I just wanted to, I've got two things, but first I wanted to ask whether or not we would have officials coming back, because I believe that the last time that officials had spoken on WTO we're going back a year ago now. So certainly there's been a lot of updates since then. So I'm wondering if the plan also includes to have officials come in front of the committee. And the second thing is I had read in my notice to motion, and I'd like to table that. I'm not sure if you want me to read it again. I've already done it in this meeting, but this was for to look at the effectiveness of the integrity declaration of doing business with Xinjiang entities. So I'm moving that. If you'd like, I can read it. I did read it earlier.
Yes, you read it into the record, so
I'm moving it.
So you're moving it now.
Yes, I'm moving it now. Yes.
Mr. Sheehan and then Ms. Badayan.
Well, thank you very much. And I had a sort of a similar question about order of precedence. You know, you've outlined, Madam Chair, a number of things coming down the pipe, and then we all have, you know, myself and Tracy and Alistair has just, you know, talked about some motions that we could use as well. But if we could hear from the clerk, just for clarity about how order of precedence would happen, because the notice of motion that I introduced Thursday afternoon on studying, you know, green technology and exports was distributed in both official languages. The one thing I did not say, just for clarity, is I see it as about a 3 or 4 meeting study. And the one thing that we have done in other committees is, you know, the ebb and flow of how business is done. Sometimes we get at things very quickly, and then we find we have, you know, an hour left here, an hour left there, or something or other, whereby we could then perhaps entertain various other studies that could be, you know, plugged in throughout time instead of just devoting it all at once. So those are just some of my thoughts about committee business. So if I could hear from the clerk, Madam Chair, just about order of precedence, because it'll help me think about, you know, our future committee business.
Okay, Madam Clerk.
There is no order of precedence. A motion can be adopted by a committee to undertake a study, and the study will never be done because of because of lack of time, or because there's other emergencies. And as for the private members bill, if it's referred to the committee will have 60 sitting days to report it back to the House. So it can decide to do the PMB bill first, and then the self-initiated studies after, or otherwise. Like the calendar is up to the committee. It has, as I said, by standing order, the committee has 60 sitting days to report back a private member's bill to the House.
Thank you very much, Christine. Ms. Badayan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, et je remercie également Christine.
I'd also like to thank Christine, our clerk, for clarifying everything.
We would know about the private members bill. I believe you mentioned a date earlier.
Sorry, would you repeat that? Ms. Badayan, couldn't hear you.
Do you know when we would know whether or not the private members bill is referred to our committee?
It could happen this week, but there's no guarantee on it. We will have, again, 60 days to respond once we have it. So could I make a suggestion on...
Sorry, Madam Chair, I was not finished. I just would like to also advise all members of the committee that the minister is available to come appear before this committee on the estimates, as of course is custom. And I believe that we do have until May for that to happen, but the minister is certainly interested in coming back to see colleagues on this committee.
Okay. If I can't, Mr. Savard-Tremblay.
Well, the last comments from Madame Bendayan, I don't know if the minister had justified on the dispute settlement that would allow us to clarify Canada's position. Is that something that might interest him? Yes, thank you, Mr. Savard-Tremblay. I do believe, yes. However, I would add maybe we should add another meeting to study, like for the study at issue. What's before us is 2 meetings, at least. So maybe today we could agree on 3 meetings to allow us to invite the minister.
So just to go back on the things that we've already agreed to, the ISDS, we voted on it in the fall, last October, I believe. to have 2 meetings. It's now been suggested that we might want to have 3 meetings on the ISDS. That we already had agreed that we would do. As well as the WTO, we had said possibly 3 meetings. If we have 1 more meeting and include the officials that Ms. Gray had suggested this morning, if everybody's in favor of that. So we would have a 3rd meeting on WTO with the officials for the last hour, if everybody would agree to that. And we would start the ISDS. We would start with the IDS. So that kind of starts us going in a direction. But we have the 2 that were introduced this morning, both Mr. Sheehan's motion and Ms. Gray as well. If the committee wants to discuss those motions at this time, Ms. Gray.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to mention that my motion is on the floor to discuss and vote on that. Thank you.
Okay. So, any comments on Ms. Gray's motion? Do you want to speak to it in general terms, Ms. Gray?
Yes, absolutely. And this is definitely timely, a timely motion. We do know that the government has what's called the Integrity Declaration on Doing Business with Xinjiang entities, and so this is to look at how that is functioning. We do know that that there was a vote in the House of Commons to declare a genocide, and that was voted on by members of Parliament. And so this is something that is timely to look at. We're talking about human rights. We're talking about looking at exports from that region in China. So this is why this would be a timely study to be looking at. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. Ms. Bendayan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and allow me to thank my colleague, Ms. Gray, for putting forward this important study for consideration. I do, however, believe that we have an entire committee which was created at the request of the Conservative Party in order to study our relationship with China, in particular, the commercial relationship that we have with China. And so given the number of studies that we have on the table at this committee, that there is a committee that exists for this sole purpose, a special committee, I would suggest to my colleagues that we have an outlet for this question, that it should be studied, and it will be studied at that other committee. I understand that there's a subcommittee meeting of the Canada-China Special Committee today even, and I would encourage all members of this committee to see if that issue, which is being proposed by Ms. Gray, could be studied there, which would be far more appropriate. Madam Chair, I believe you're on mute.
Thank you. It's hard to keep going back and forth, I have to tell you guys, and thank you for your patience. Ms. Gray, you had additional comments?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that particular committee is not focused on trade. They're focused on a lot of diplomatic and foreign relations, and so this is absolutely appropriate with this committee. This is entirely focused on trade, and also this is an initiative that was put forth by the government, and so it's a matter of looking at reviewing this to see how it's functioning within trade as of right now. So that's the purpose of this. This is actually looking at something that exists, and it absolutely falls within the Trade Committee.
Thank you. Mr. Abatai?
Yeah, thank you. This is long overdue, I believe, and could not come at a better time to study the trade relations, the rationales of all the dynamic. doing trade with China in lieu of everything's happening right now. So I think this is very, very critical, and I believe priority to have this on the schedule will be recommended and would be nice to see. Thanks.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, just for clarification, are the motions that were introduced today and introduced last week, are all of them in order for this committee?
To my knowledge, the motion that were distributed, they are in order.
Thank you. All right. Okay, I've got hands up. Whoops, Mr. Abutai, if you can, there you go. Okay. Between hands up and hands down and muting, it's an interesting process here. All right. Any further discussion on Ms. Gray has moved her motion, which was duly given knowledge for. So we should call a vote on Ms. Gray's motion. Is everyone in agreement that we'll call a vote on Ms. Gray's motion? I don't see anybody saying anything, so I'm going to go ahead with the vote. Would you like a recorded vote on this motion? Ms. Gray?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Madam Clerk?
So the vote is on Ms. Gray's motion. Mr. Aria?
No.
Madame Bendayan?
No.
Mr. Dhaliwal?
No.
Mr. Sarai?
No.
Mr. Sheehan?
No.
Mr. Abultaif?
Yes.
Ms. Gray?
Yes.
Mr. Hoback? I didn't hear you,
Yes.
sir. Mr. Lobb?
Yes.
Monsieur
Yes.
Savard, Monsieur Savard-Tremblay? Je vous ai pas entendu.
J'ai dit non.
Mr. McGregor?
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, nays 6, yeas 5.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Mr. McGregor. Oh, I'm sorry, I have Mr. Sheehan first and then Mr. McGregor.
Well, thank you very much. And, you had mentioned about entertaining the various motions that notice of motions that have been, placed onto the table. But I think with only 4 minutes, 3 minutes left, I would probably look to move my motion probably on Friday and just have an opportunity for people to discuss, the said motion, if warranted. Obviously, if people wanted to support it right now, I would obviously entertain that. But I just was prepared just to note, for a notice of motion. But Chair, you did mention something about entertaining, voting on it now. But again, from way back in the day on my old city council days, I always like to do notice of motions just to give people, the time to read it, and it's been circulated in both official languages too. So again, it's an important motion around green tech that is, coast to coast. Like every province has green tech opportunities, for scale up. So that's why I introduced that. So I leave that with the committee, but I just wanted to note that it's such an important discussion that wanted to make sure that we had the appropriate time set aside and to answer those questions, because I would not want it to be defeated just simply because it was seemed to be rushed. That's all.
No, we fully support you, Terry.
Thank you. You're on mute, Judy.
Is the committee of the desire to vote on Mr. Sheehan's motion today or hold it off for another day? I've got 2 yeses. Any objections to Mr. Sheehan's motion? Okay, hold on. Mr. McGregor and then Mr. Lobb. Mr. McGregor?
Yeah, sorry, where are we at, Madam Chair? Still on Mr. Sheehan's motion? Because I was...
Yes.
Okay, then I'll defer until after this business is concluded.
Mr. Lobb?
Just on Mr.
Speaking
Sheehan's.
to Mr. Sheehan's motion.
Yeah, just the Mr. Sheehan's motion. The thing I look at it and I understand where Mr. Sheehan's coming from, but I do know like it's specific in some ways around talking about wind and solar and other things like that. But you know, say for example, nuclear, which I would consider green, it's not listed on there. Some of the stuff in and around oil and gas sector, it's not listed in there that would be considered green technology. So I'm just wondering, you know, if we look at this at another meeting for business, is this something we can make more general instead of making it more specific? Because, you know, for my own 2 cents, I would want to throw in a friendly amendment in and around nuclear can-do technology and all the other supporting services that go along with it. So I don't want to ruin Mr. Sheehan's motion if he wanted to keep it that way, but just something to have him think about maybe over the next couple of days.
So Mr. Sheehan, are you okay with, are you all right with holding your motion down?
I would, because what Mr. Law brought up are very salient points, and those two other industries onto themselves are extremely important to me, important to Canadians, and onto themselves, and just the spirit of this motion, I would think that those two industries almost onto themselves warrant, like, you know, their own particular studies. I mean, we got Tenaris tubes here in the soup, but I'm not going to go down the the proverbial rabbit hole. But yes, those are industries that definitely are important to Canadians, and I would think that they almost deserve a study onto themselves. But I take that under advisement, and I think that we probably should come back to my resolution, you know, with this thoughts in our head.
I'm just keeping my eye on the clock here. So at the moment, we've got WTO, ISDS is what's ahead of us in the immediate future. I have Mr. McGregor and then Mr. Hoback. Mr. McGregor, the floor is yours.
Yes. So Mr. Sheehan has ceded the floor then on his motion?
Yes, we'll not be voting on that today.
So I wanted to know, Madam Clerk, or Madam Chair, to the clerk, if I wanted to have a vote on the motion I talked about earlier, could I push for that right now if I so wished? Because there have been talks with the Bloc and with the Conservatives, so the motion has been circulated, and I could read it into the record one more time.
But it would have to be the original motion. I would believe it has to be the original motion that Mr. Blakey moved in the fall. Without
yes, but if I wanted to push for the motion as amended right now for a vote, could I do so?
Madam Chair, just in case this assists your reflection, I do have another engagement at 1 o'clock. This is the end of our committee time. Yeah. Of course, if you decide to go on without me, I will find a substitute.
Well, it is 1 o'clock, and I don't believe there's an urgency when things get changed, Mr. McGregor, for the timelines to continue on. Certainly, Mr. Blakey can speak to this, I would believe, on Friday, since the meeting time has run out at this particular point.
All right. Well, recognizing the time, I'll respect everyone's commitments, and I'll allow
Mr.
Mr. Blakey to move it next time.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGregor. All right, thank you to the committee very much for your continued dedication and help, and great seeing you, and we will see you later on in the week. Okay, thank you. Meeting adjourned.